What's up, RoyalSpartan tribe? This is RoyalSpartan, back for yet another great reaction. Okay, this is what if Britain joined the Axis? Okay, we did one about America, the same guy. What if America joined the Axis? So I thought, why not do the British one as well? If you like my reactions, if you like this channel, think about joining my Patreon. Or at least just taking a look at it, you know? You can get access to my full-length videos there, and polls and stuff like that. So yeah, let's check it out. The first one was a requested video live on Twitch stream. I'm still on Twitch stream right now, the same stream in fact. But this one is not requested. This is one I chose myself after doing the first one. I'm just curious to see what way it would go this time. So yeah, let's jump in.
It seems you guys really enjoyed our video hypothetically speculating what would have happened if America joined the Axis, so here we are with a similar yet very different question. It may seem like an obvious answer from the surface that if Britain teamed up with Germany, Italy, and Japan, that the war certainly wouldn't have lasted as long as it did.
No.
In fact, odds are the majority of Europe would have fallen and been under Axis control. But when looking at alternate history, there are tons of variables and factors that we need to look at. Knowing about this alliance, how would neighboring countries and even countries overseas react? We'll be breaking this question down for you guys on Life's Biggest Questions as we ask, what if Britain joined the Axis? What's going down, guys? Welcome back to LBQ. I'm your host, Jared Bronstein, and today we're talking about the 1930s and 40s. Don't touch that dial, as I'll be replying to some of your comments from a previous video to wrap this one up, but for now, let's get right into it. If you don't know anything at all about the history of the Second World War or the Axis and Allied powers, I'm going to give you guys a very quick summary. And don't worry, this time I won't make the same mistake as I previously did, claiming Roosevelt was assassinated. Although technically, as some of you said, he was assassinated by nature in the form of a stroke. I can admit when I'm wrong. I'm confident this time I'll get it right, so let's have a 2-minute history lesson. Post-World War I, things across Europe were still incredibly troublesome. Many attribute World War II to actually being a postponed continuation of the First World War, with about 20 years of tensions growing, leading to the German-occupied invasion of Poland on September 1st, 1939. By this point, Adolf Hitler would have already named himself the Führer, aka Supreme Leader of Germany, would have a common interest with Italy and Japan to make an official alliance, while also branching out and taking over Czechoslovakia and Austria. A deal would also be signed with the USSR's Joseph Stalin, agreeing that the two countries wouldn't treat each other as enemies or allies, so long as the USSR stays out of Germany's way while they try to take over. The deal would also include the stipulation that when all was said and done, the two countries would split what was expected to be a fully occupied Eastern Europe. Britain and France had an agreement with Poland that, should Germany attack, the two countries would help defend. On September 1st, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, Britain and France stayed true to their promise and officially declared war on Germany on September 3rd, signifying the official start of the Second World War. But imagine how differently things would have potentially played out had Britain formed an alliance with the Axis powers known as Germany, Japan, and Italy. If you know about the history of the war, the British were believed to have the strongest navy, but the Germans weren't too far behind. This was evident when the German U-boats, along with their aircraft, seemingly pushed the British military to their limits. Although the British were able to fend off the German invasion, Prime Minister Sir Winston Churchill would eventually reach out to US President Franklin D. Roosevelt for assistance in the form of the Lend-Lease Act. However, prior to this, Roosevelt would persuade Congress to allow the US to aid France and Britain with military supplies with the condition that they pay up front and transport the goods on their own ships. In 1939, the Neutrality Act would be signed, indicating that the US wanted no part of the war happening in Europe and would remain neutral. That being said, Roosevelt also used language which indicated, at some point, the United States may be dragged into the war, siding with like-minded governments. In this case, that would be Britain and France, and following the German takeover of France, Britain would ask for the help of the US in the form of the Lend-Lease Act. This would allow the British to use American goods and pay the country back in a way Roosevelt deemed appropriate over the course of the next 99 years. In Roosevelt's mind, this would help bring down the Nazi movement across Europe without directly getting involved in the war. It's a win-win for the good guys. And that's not where things left off, but for the sake of this video, we'll stop with the history lesson there. Now let's change our focus and imagine if Britain teamed up with the Axis powers, originally known as Germany, Japan, and Italy, but eventually expanding into numerous other countries. Either by sheer force or with the promise that their territory or land would be protected by the original three Axis powers, Hungary, Romania, Slovakia, Bulgaria, and Croatia would also team up with the original three. And now we'll be adding Britain to the mix. As I always say, there are so many variables when looking at alternative history. We could consider Britain joining the Axis after the France invasion, meaning they switched sides. Or they possibly make an agreement with the Axis powers prior to the invasion of Poland, and the Pact of Three becomes a Pact of Four. Depending when Britain would hypothetically join the Axis determines how things would have likely played out. For this video, we'll be focusing on the idea that prior prior to any invasion or official start of war, somehow Hitler and Churchill come to an agreement that they will take over all of Europe with the help of Italy and Japan. Based on how the historical events did play out, with the USSR and Germany taking over Poland and expanding their territories throughout most of Eastern Europe, and France eventually falling to an occupied Germany, Britain was the only thing really standing in Germany's way. Spain did what they could to remain neutral, although it has been argued that their leader believed in Germany's ideologies, and only when the Axis powers' defeat appeared inevitable did Spain truly remain neutral. That being said, some people from Spain fought alongside the Axis powers under the condition that they would not fight against the Allied powers and just go after the Soviets. Others fought against the Axis, going to France and fighting alongside them, while a small group...
So, did I just hear that... Did he say Spain agreed to fight against the Soviets but not the Allies? Hold on, I need to go back. I need to see if that's what he said. He said Spain was neutral, pretty much neutral, but I want to be sure. Hold on.
Britain was the only thing really standing in Germany's way. Spain did what they could to remain neutral, although it has been argued that their leader believed in Germany's ideologies, and only when the Axis powers' defeat appeared inevitable did Spain truly remain neutral. That being said, some people from Spain fought alongside the Axis powers under the condition that they would not fight against the Allied powers and just go after the Soviets.
Yeah.
Others fought against the Axis, going to France and...
Yeah, I was sort of wondering. Yeah, I was sort of wondering about Spain. I even said that to my chat. Did Spain fight in the war? I never heard about them fighting in the war, but apparently they did. They fought against the Soviets. Or at least they said they would. España Fascista? Is that what you said? Yeah. And you think that's what it was called? Okay. Yeah, my chat's telling me that that's what it was called. Well, we know it didn't help, no. Yeah. But they officially stayed out of it, because Germany lost. Yeah, of course. They officially stayed out of it, at least as far as the Allies were concerned. But I'm sure Russia wasn't too happy.
That being said, some people from Spain fought alongside the Axis powers under the condition that they would not fight against the Allied powers and just go after the Soviets. Others fought against the Axis, going to France and fighting alongside them, while a small group decided to go to the USSR and fight the Soviets post-1941 German invasion. And with all this in mind, if Britain decided to side with the Axis powers, it seems a complete takeover of Europe would be inevitable. Given the power the British military had, both in the sea and air, alongside with the powerful German military, it seems quite evident that France would have fallen even faster than they did historically. Even though Sweden remained neutral through it all, it's likely while the Germans invaded Norway, they would also expand into Sweden, especially with the help of the British Navy flanking them from the west. But there's also an incredibly interesting factor when speaking on the British joining the Axis powers: Canada. With such a close relationship with Britain, although they joined the war on their own, it seems a British alliance with the Axis would either see Canada jumping on board or coming to terms with the United States that they would need to work together on defending all of North America, with the help of Mexico as well. We'd also have to determine if Germany would still decide to go after the USSR and if Japan would attack Pearl Harbor. Assuming that the Axis would easily conquer all of Western Europe, including Portugal and Spain, simply because they could and would want as much control as possible, what would their next move be? At this point, the Axis...
Okay, I can't see Japan attacking Pearl Harbor if America is part of the Axis. No, there'll be no point to that. They're allies at this point. I talked to my chat about Germany and no, sorry. But if Britain joined Germany, would Canada join Britain? I think they might, because their connection to Britain back then, the British Empire, was so strong, compared to America. I don't know if Australia would join them. I don't think they would. I'm not too sure about Canada either, but it's hard to say. It's really hard to say about Canada. It's up in the air about that one, I think.
Assuming that the Axis would easily conquer all of Western Europe, including Portugal and Spain, simply because they could and would want as much control as possible, what would their next move be? At this point, the Axis would be in control of every country west of Poland, as well as half of Poland, which they would split with the USSR. The USSR would be in control of Latvia, Lithuania, and half of Poland, as well as Estonia. The Axis would also likely expand north into Finland and Sweden, and Ireland, although they remain neutral, would also be taken by the British. Now, under the assumption
Yeah.
that the Axis are in control of the majority of Europe and are in an agreement with Japan, it seems the takeover of the USSR would be easier than it was historically. Given that the United States and Canada would realize they would be incredibly outnumbered and defeated quickly, the two Western countries would do what they could to completely stay out of things, letting Germany and co. do whatever they felt they needed to do. Inevitably, this would likely lead to an entire European invasion of the USSR, and Japan would also be a part of that invasion. Although Japan was dealing with a war of their own against China, it seems that with the Japanese helping Europe take down their biggest threat in the USSR, Hitler and company would return the favor against China. And given that the USSR would not be able to put up nearly as much of a fight against all of Europe as they did historically, it seems the entire Soviet Union would fall to the powers of the Axis. And following the conquering of all of Europe, the sights would be set on Asia, in which China would be the next victim. To say the entire world would eventually fall to the hands of the Axis powers could be true, but it could also be a stretch. Given that the United States was working on nuclear warfare in 1939, it's not such a crazy thought that fearing the inevitable attack of the new Europe, they decide to go on the offensive. And by that I mean Canada, Mexico, and the US team up with any other country in the world to try and fend off the fascist ideologies they disagreed with. This could mean that the US, Canada, Mexico, and China team up to go against most of Europe, but it's also entirely possible the USSR reaches out to the US for help. Central and South American countries may also see this as an opportunity to help stop the spread of the fascist movement, teaming up with their northern neighbors. Regardless, this could potentially lead to an American bombing of European countries under the powers of the Axis, but not just any kind of bombing. Nuclear bombing. Instead of going after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the US could possibly drop nukes right in the middle of an occupied Europe, or it could potentially drop bombs scattered across. The damage they would initially cause would be unparalleled, and the sheer destruction and loss of life could potentially either persuade the Axis powers to surrender altogether, or at the very least see some of the countries originally siding with Germany to go play for the other team.
America
of course, this
Europe,
would be assuming that the European powers didn't hit the US and Canada first, as it likely wouldn't be much of a war with the majority of the world attacking North America. Ultimately, it seems this plays out one of two ways. The Axis continue dominating country after country and growing, which would lead to a takeover of the world, or the remaining Allied forces attack the Axis in such a way that they decide to cut their losses and just end the war right then and there. But as we know, things wouldn't end there, as there would be plenty of different ideologies seemingly being controlled by one ruler, or empire if you will. For example, the British monarch would somehow have to find a way to coexist with a fascist Germany and Italy, which would see problems in itself. Another interesting angle to take with this video would be how the British would handle the different ideologies they had with these fascist countries. This could potentially lead to a civil war among the European countries, who would also need to fend off the North American alliance, which would likely include Central and South America, and possibly even African countries. It's safe to say if Britain decided to join the Axis, life as we know it would be incredibly different. Certain religions, races, and ideologies could potentially be completely wiped off the face of the earth, and the size and population of countries would change drastically. It may even lead to a third world war, assuming that the ideologies put in place across Europe wouldn't last forever, and a civil war of sorts sees the entire continent divided. Again, there's no way of knowing for sure what happens, but as I always say, it sure is fun to speculate.
Okay, that was interesting. What was it you said? America after nuclear bombing Europe to the point to hold Chernobyl. Yeah, I forgot where that's my problem. Jeez, ouch. Yeah, I can't see UK or the British Empire ever joining the Axis, to be honest. The ideals are just too different. The ideals are just too different between the two. And even if they did join, it wouldn't last. You know? Eventually, Britain would join with America. I think. You know? Okay. Until next time, I am out of here.